Okay, continuing on from the last Polychaeta video, or the last Annelid general characteristics video, we're going into the class Polychaeta, which are the marine worms, the worms that are mostly aquatic, and Polychaete means many hairs. They do all sorts of lifestyles. They're found in almost every habitat. A lot of mostly benthic habitats. Some are in the plankton, but these things are carnivores, deposit feeders, suspension feeders, grazers, parasites. They kind of do it all. Since they do it all, we would expect that they would have very different structures, and that's exactly what we see. And most of the difference is in the head region, and that will be developed or dependent on how they go about feeding and what habitats they live in. They also have something called the cuticle, which is a precursor to a skeleton. Here's the cuticle. So it's outside of the body, and it gives them a little bit of harder structure than just the tissue. Okay, let's look at the overall body plan of polychaete worms. First thing you notice about these things is they have segments. Okay, the segments are the same. They look exactly the same. From this segment and this segment look just the same. And that's how these things work, is they just replicate the same segment over and over and over again and get longer. There are two places that have different looking segments, which is the last segment and the first two segments. There's my little thing. There we go. The first two segments. So the last one is where segments are added. So new segments grow behind the last segment, added to the body in the growth zone. The final segment stays the final segment, and then new ones are added just above it. And the first segment is very different and based on the lifestyle of that particular organism. So they all have the first two segments known as the prostomium, which are slightly different than the rest of the segments. They have a brain, and they're divided. They can be divided bilaterally, so they're bilaterally symmetrical, as you can see. The brain organizes the function and the directional movement because they have a grouping of the sensory organs towards the front of the body. Then that's called cephalization. We've seen that before. They can have anywhere from 2 to 10 eye spots. They'll have paired antennas right here and here. And then they also have palps. Okay? And the palps can do lots of different things. They can have sensory function. They can help with gathering food. They can help with manipulating food. And we'll have a look at a lot of different kinds of those throughout the course of this video. They also have, as you see, these paired appendages called parapodium. And so this is what we see as sort of a precursor to limbs. And off of the end of each of the limbs are these things called setae, or sometimes spelled C-H-E-T-A-E, which would be where polychaetes come from, chaetae, which means hair. And these things are the parapodium and the setae are shaped according to the function of that animal. Here we see a larger polychaete. This one happens to be a predator, and you can see that it's a replication of the segments throughout the whole length of the body. Anytime you see segmented worms, especially with these two, parapodia and setae on each segment, you know you're talking about a polychaete annelid. In this case, here's what the head looks like when it is not, when it doesn't have its pharynx everted, when it's just crawling around through the mud. You see the tentacles, the palps, and the, what do you call these things? The antenna. Okay, the tentacles are have a sensory capability on this species. Not all species have tentacles. Not all species have gills, but some of them do have gills on the side of the segments. But you can see here that the mouth and the mouth, which is back here, opens up, and the pharynx comes out, and this comes out, shoots out very quickly in order to grab prey. And here are these pretty massive jaws for an animal this size. A lot of these things can be quite poisonous. We also see here the parapodium, which is the appendage that comes off of the segment, and the setae right here, which are these little hair-like bristles. Okay. Parapodia, as we've discussed, paired lateral appendages adapted in many different ways, each with the setae on the end of them. And here you can see a micrograph, which is just a picture taken through a microscope of the setae on the end of the parapodia, which are adapted for burrowing. And look at the way these things could get a nice grip into the substrate. They have a well-developed closed blood vascular system. What are the functions of the system? Well, obviously the functions are to remove the carbon dioxide and nitrogen, all the wastes, and bring in new oxygen. If you remember the polychaetas and the like, they couldn't get very big because they had to rely on diffusion. But now we see the development of a vascular system, and so the animal can grow bigger and service organs further and deeper into the body. How does the blood get moved around? It gets moved around with paired hearts in each segment. And how does the oxygen and the CO2 get exchanged? Well, just like you saw in mammals, birds, and fish, you saw that there were gills, and polychaetas can have gills. But also, sometimes they just have highly vascularized skin, so the blood is circulated very close to the skin, and then the oxygen and waste just diffuse in and out through the skin. Okay. Regeneration. These things are exceptional at being able to rebuild body parts. And so it's pretty amazing, even if you cut the head off of a polychaeta. This is one of those things that people, that when they're kids, they learn that if you cut a worm in half, that both ends of the body will grow back into two new worms. Well, that's not necessarily true. It depends on whether they have enough energy reserves to regrow a head while they can't feed. But sometimes they do, and yeah, that is true. If that's the case, that they can regrow into two whole new organisms. 17 reproductive modes, so they do all sorts of things. Dioecious, hermaphrodites, broadcast spawning, copulation, something called epitoky, which we'll look at in a second, budding, so that you can't pigeonhole these into any particular reproductive mode. So here's budding. Let's get our little pen up. So you can see the new individuals growing off of the back. All right, they grow from the growth zone, and then eventually this thing will just split off and swim away. And here's a nice picture of one that you can see the new individuals budding off of the back. Perhaps there'll be even an environmental cue where loads of them will suddenly break away, and maybe they'll be kept with the parent until such time as there's lots of food and a good chance for the new ones to survive. Epitoky is kind of an interesting other way of spawning. So they grow things off of the back, much like we just saw. They grow new bodies off of the back, and then the parapodia get really large, and they turn into paddle-like ones for swimming. And then they swim up to the surface waters when they're all released at the same time, and then break open, so the whole thing just bursts like a balloon, and it's filled with either sperm or eggs, and so these things are released into the surface waters, hopefully to find other epitokes that have just released. So here we see on the right the amazing paddle-like parapodia of these epitokes, and somebody eating the epitokes, which are netted. People generally do like to eat things that are sperm and eggs because they're very rich within calories. If you think about like breaking open a quina, that's the part that you eat, the roe. We eat fish roe, like caviar. You can see the long antennas on the right, the epitoke at the right, which means that they're probably swimming around much like a luna moth, where they're trying to find other members of their, other reproductive bodies like themselves, so that they have a better chance of reproducing and having the sperm and eggs find each other. That'll do it for this video. We'll return in Annelids 3.